Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First, let me say that I appreciate where Minister Maliki is coming from. In fact, we are the same age, so I think we do understand each other to a large extent. To clarify, he earlier mentioned that we should approach society's future with boldness, and certainly I think all of us celebrate the ethnic diversity. I don't think any of us is pretending that, we are ethnically uniform or that there are no racial differences. But I wanted to ask him whether he thinks it's actually possible, the community expertise that he mentioned that is in the self-help groups, is it not possible to bring everybody under one national umbrella so that we don't lose that expertise in that sense, but at the same time, with such a national body, there will be the advantage of pooling of national resources from the whole population that will be contributing to this pool. And it will also have the additional, I think, uplifting effect for some that they're actually contributing to a race blind fund. I wanted to ask whether he thinks that this discussion can be opened. And I think it'll be interesting to find out whether Singaporeans prefer to contribute monthly to a race blind fund or would prefer monthly to contribute to a community-based fund.
Minister Maliki.
I thank Ms. Lim for her comments, and indeed we are in the same age, born in the same year, went through similar experiences, I guess. The self-help group concept has worked for over almost 40 years now. Mendaki started in 1982, and because of the success of Mendaki and the ability for us to reach out to the Malay community, together with support from government, SINDA, CDAC was formed, and today I'm sure Ms. Sylvia Lim also knows that we do not work in silos. Over the years, we have also made effort to work together. But while we work together in different platforms, we also recognize that the uniqueness of each self-help group does serve our respective community better to a certain extent, because we do understand our cultural nuances, we do understand our cultural history, we do understand what we stand for as individual communities. So I think it is not about whether we want to pull everybody together and just have one race blind fund, but it's also to be able to give each community the space to understand their respective issues, their respective challenges, work in their own pace, and find their own strengths. So this is what we often talked about in unity and diversity, and I think we should continue to celebrate this diversity. I personally have been involved with Mendaki for many, many years. I've worked with SINDA, I've worked with CDAC, and we acknowledge the value of working together, but I think my personal belief is that we should continue in this line, and where possible, where we can galvanize our resources together, we can do that. So today, the tuition program, for example, we saw great coordination. Any child who would like to participate in any of the tuition classes can participate in a tuition class organized by CDAC, SINDA, or Mendaki because of proximity to where he or she lives. But back end, Mendaki, SINDA, and CDAC will then process the necessary administrative processes that they have put in place. So there are already efforts at collaboration, and I think it's worked well, and I think it's useful for Ms. Lim to also perhaps get further feedback from the other self-help group, and I think we should continue to allow this diversity to continue in the way we manage our issues faced by the respective communities. Thank you.
Ms. Sylvia Lim.
Thank you, Minister. Certainly, I would be most keen to take feedback from all groups available, but I certainly hope in the same vein, and more importantly, that the government will also have a sensing with Singaporeans, and particularly the younger generation, whether this is the model that they want to continue forever. Thank you.
Minister Maliki.
I want to assure Ms. Sylvia Lim that we have been talking to the younger generation for the many, many years we've been in politics, and even before that. And the younger generation do also grow up. And when they grow up, sometimes their perspective changes too. So today, we will continue to talk to our younger generation. We have the Mendaki Club, which is the younger generation of young Malay activists. CDAC has their younger Chinese activist club, and so does SINDA. And I think each of our communities do talk to each other. Each of the members of the young communities in Mendaki Club, CDAC, as well as SINDA will continue to talk together and engage in conversations, and the government continues to engage them too. And I think we remain open to look at what evolves. And I think my point is that as we talk about all this amalgamation as suggested by Ms. Siva Lim, we do have to also look at the uniqueness of these cultural nuances that's very necessary sometimes to find those solutions required for respective communities. Thank you.
Mr. Leon Pereira.
Oh, he's asking me.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just one point of clarification to the Honourable Minister, Mr. Maliki Osman. He spoke about the continued relevance in the eyes of the government of the CMIO framework, that we are members of different ethnic groups in terms of how we are viewed by government systems and processes and so on, and that it's important to keep that in mind. I think over time we have seen more and more interracial marriages between Singaporeans of different ethnic groups, and the government has more recently allowed double-barreled ethnic classification on the NRIC, and I think that has become a process that has gained some momentum. As time goes by, we may even find more marriages between a Singaporean from an interracial marriage and
Mr.
another
Pereira,
Singaporean from an interracial
Mr.
marriage.
Pereira,
Yes.
please ask your question.
Yeah. So my question is, how will the government kind of adapt to these changing realities? Would children who are offspring of such marriages be asked to classify themselves as others, or how would that be approached? Thank you.
Mr. Maliki.
I think, as you rightly put it already, they are allowed to decide for themselves. Parents are allowed to decide for themselves because of the double-barreled policies that we've put in place. So I don't think it's an issue as how the children should identify themselves. And when I come across mixed marriages, I think both parents are equally proud to want their children to grow up in the respective cultures. And I think that provides diversity for the child growing up in such a family. So I will leave it to the children, and I think the double-barrel policies allow them to make the decision on which identity they want to take up.
Mr. Leong Man Wai.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have one question, one clarification for the Minister. I've heard from what he said that there are a few things that we have to take note of and cultivate in the person in education, like in character, moral values, intercultural interactions, so also lifelong learning. Okay. I think the important thing is, while we have all these ideals that we want to achieve and objectives that we want to achieve, what are the supporting changes that we are going to make to the curriculum, to the delivery, the assessment and the pathways? Of course, I think the Minister have covered some of them. If you can share more on those, I would appreciate very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Minister Maliki.
I think I would encourage Mr. Leong to raise this at another platform, because I think this is not the right platform to elaborate on what the ministry is doing. But suffice to say, I've shared in my speech that we are looking at education beyond just the academics. The character building, I elaborated quite significantly on the citizenship and character education. We talked about experiential learning. There's a lot of progress that's been done in the way we educate our children. And because we know these are very important skill set, values that are required for our children in the future, So there's much that's been talked about in terms of changes that we put in place in the education system. I invite Mr. Leong to look up some of this information, and if he needs further information at another platform, I invite him to file questions or raise some of these issues. Just find that this may not be the right forum, because I think there could be many other speakers, and I would invite Ms. Leong to also look at my speech again and see how I've elaborated on the various changes we've put in place in our education system.
Mr. Iswaran?
I wanted to ask a clarification of Ms. Sylvia Lim. And the reason I rise is because I was the first CEO of CINDA. And at the time that I was CEO of CINDA, we worked collaboratively with Mendaki, which was helmed by Mr. Zainal Abidin Rashid. We worked with the CDAC, which was led by Mr. Chan Su Sen, and also with the Eurasian Association, which was at that time led by, the chairman was the father of our Deputy Speaker, Mr. Timothy D'Souza. And I understand where she's coming from about the questions that are being raised. When I was asked to be the CEO, I had the same questions. But I think after involvement and seeing the evolution, and not just in individual silos, but I think in the collaborative way in which our self-help groups have operated. So be it in the context of educational support, be it in the sharing of expertise, and be it in the area of working with government on various policy initiatives, I think it is fair to say that our self-help groups have not been ossified. They have evolved. There has been a response to not just the feedback from population, but also from the needs, the evolving needs of the different communities and how we can work together. And I think the member is also fully aware of the range of programs that are now being mounted individually and collectively by these self-help groups. So, and the number of people who are being helped. So with that understanding, with that appreciation of the evolution, the question I have for her is, does she feel that we would be better off without the self-help groups? Is that her assertion?
Ms. Sylvia Lim?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I respect Minister Iswaran's experience, and that is his perspective from having worked in CINDA before as a CEO. And his question is whether I am positing that society would be better off without the self-help groups. Now, first of all, in my speech, I had acknowledged the good work done by the self-help groups, especially for the underprivileged and children in particular. But the question, of course, is whether similar outcomes or even better outcomes can be achieved with an amalgamation. So this is something I'm calling for an open conversation about. I'm not trying to be prescriptive to say that the answer is to amalgamate, but it was put forward as a suggestion from me as something that could be discussed in the national exercise, and that was that was the spirit of my speech.
Minister Iswaran?
So I take it that the member's position is not that she's advocate, because an amalgamation is an effective dissolution of the existing entity. So I'm assuming you're not recommending that, but your proposition is that we should have an ongoing dialogue in terms of how we can work closer together. And that, in fact, is what has been happening all along, and that's why the self-help groups have evolved the way they have. So I'm not quite clear what the member's proposition is, or if there's a specific proposal that the member has.
Okay, Ms. Sylvia Lim?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, the spirit of my speech is to call for an open conversation on whether the self-help groups should remain distinct as they are different entities. Even if they collaborate, the question is whether it would be something that society wants to move on about, to have these, all the work done under a national body in that sense. And I can just share with the House as well, I think Minister is a bit older than me, but doesn't matter. The fact is that there are many people in my generation, as I mentioned in my speech, who grew up during Rajaratnam's time. Our distinct memory was quite different from the reality that I sense today. And in fact, many of my contemporaries actually wrote to me thereafter to say that they are very uncomfortable with the self-help groups as they are. So I mean, I respect that there may be different views on this, as I said, but I think it's important for us to have a conversation, and as the President says, in a spirit of mutual respect and being open to the possibility that things may not be static.
Minister
Madam,
Iswaran.
the hour is late. I don't want to prolong this, but there are so many things wrong with that. Firstly, about age. I'm not that much older than the member, but I will leave that for now. But I think more specifically, calling for an open dialogue, I think is very welcome. We can all do that. But when you start the dialogue, what is your starting position? That is unclear.
Okay, Ms. Sylvia Lim.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think in my speech I made a suggestion that we might want to look into whether the self-help groups should be amalgamated into a national body. I didn't say that this is the answer, but this is something which I think should be in the discussion. And if in the end, at the end of the whole national exercise, the consensus is no, we shouldn't do it, I'll respect that, but I think we need to have a starting point for discussion.
SMS Janil.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I echo Minister Ishwaran's apologies for prolonging this matter. I would just like to reframe the matter that perhaps Ms. Sylvia Lim is coming to this a little bit late. That such a body exists. In fact, we have several such bodies that exist that engaged in non-ethnic based help across a number of communities, across a number of causes, across a number of ages. This includes the PA, and I know Ms. Sylvia Lim and her colleagues have particular views of the PA, but it's not limited to the PA. One of those bodies was actually founded by the self-help groups coming together several years ago, and we celebrated our 10th anniversary a few years ago. I happen to be the chairman of onepeople.sg, and indeed we have been engaging in such conversations with a wide variety of people. Rather than talking about getting rid of existing bodies or creating new bodies, perhaps we should work with the bodies that already exist. Singaporeans can volunteer for more than one body, more than one organization, often do. Singaporeans can contribute funding to more than one body, and often do. And there's plenty of room in Singapore for us to work through a variety of means to achieve this common aim. I just wanted to put that on the table. This is not a new idea. It has been posited before, and there are people who've actually made this happen. And if people would like to come and find out a bit more about what these bodies are doing, I'd be very happy to provide them some instruction. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Obliged for your indulgence.
Lim, last point.
Madam Speaker, I'll be happy to make this last point. I'd like to thank SMS Janil for sharing his efforts, in, I suppose, promoting interracial unity, I would say, in a more general way. But of course, one of the questions which I have, which is part of my suggestion, if you like, is that currently the self-help groups, it's a government-sanctioned network to make monthly deductions from Singaporeans on a race-based basis. And this is something that I think deserves a second look. Thank you.
Okay, SMS Janil, last point.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to point out that the self-help groups do actually provide monetary contributions to onepeople.sg as well.